Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. So recently, I've been working on a video on whether or not blood work is needed if you are taking finasteride or dutasteride, because I get almost as many questions about blood work as I do about shedding. But as you chooms already know, researching into new treatments for hair loss keeps breaking these days in 2025. So I've had to put that video on hold for now, because there is breaking news on a hair loss treatment called ET-02. If that sounds familiar to you, that may be because I did a video on this treatment about a year ago, or a little over a year ago. I can't remember exactly when. But in case you've forgotten what ET-02 is, and honestly, chooms, I had to refresh my own memory on this subject as well. ET-02 is an inhibitor of PI1, which stands for Plasminogen Activator Inhibitor 1. Okay, so what is PI1 and what does it have to do with hair loss exactly? Well, PI1 is a protein that is involved in the blood clotting system. What it does is pretty complicated, and that's because the blood clotting system is really intricate, as you can see in this diagram. Finding PI1 in this diagram is a little bit like finding Waldo, or a woman desperate enough to date Jason Blaha, but here it is. So, rather than go through exactly how PI1 works, which I did in my last video on PI1, I'll just go ahead and simplify it. The bottom line is that PI1 increases the blood's ability to clot. That isn't necessarily a good thing, though. Blood clotting is definitely good if you get a wound and start bleeding, but remember, blood clots also cause heart attacks and strokes, so if the blood clots too easily, you can have some very serious and fatal problems. So, drugs that block the effects of PI1 could be helpful if you're having problems from blood clots. So I'm sure someone is thinking right now, but Kevin, that's nice and all, but what does any of that have to do with regrowing hair? You need to get to the point, bro. Fair point. Well, to be honest, chooms, it's not completely clear how PI1 fits into treating hair loss. It looks like PI1 is involved in more roles in the body than just blood clotting, though. For example, elevated PI1 may play a role in the development of obesity. Also, elevated PI1 can actually stimulate the formation of tumors and cancer. But the key to the connection between PI1 and hair growth may be the link between PI1 and aging. There is some very basic research that shows that increasing PI1 causes cell aging, aka cell senescence. This aging effect of PI1 was demonstrated in carriers of a defective gene for PI1 in an Amish community. The age of death was delayed an average of 7 years in people with the defective gene for PI1. People with the defective gene also had a lower incidence of diabetes and improved cardiovascular function, as well as longer telomere length, which is also associated with longevity. So, blocking PI1 could have anti-aging effects. In fact, I'm sure Brian Johnson is anxious to lower his PI1 levels as soon as an oral drug to lower PI1 becomes available. But could blocking PI1 also have an anti-aging effect on our hair follicles? Could it restore our youthful pre-adolescent hair pattern? Could it reverse the development of gray hair even? Well, this is apparently what Therapeutics Incorporated was betting on when they filed this patent in 2020 for developing PI1 blocking drugs in order to treat hair loss and hair graying. Anyways, when I made my previous video on PI1 and ET-02, I was pretty unenthusiastic because there wasn't a lot of research linking PI1 to hair loss, and there was literally no human research at all, so I didn't really get the hype. There was one rodent study, though, where mice were given the human PI1 gene using gene editing. These mice produce high levels of human PI1 in their blood. The result was that the mice failed to grow hair. In this figure, the second mouse from the left has the human PI1 gene, and it has no hair. So, if increasing PI1 can cause hair loss, then theoretically, lowering PI1 levels or blocking PI1 could possibly induce hair growth. So, Irion has been developing PI1 blocking drugs. And here you can see their timeline of drug development, at least how it was a year ago. But again, as of a year ago, there were no human results. All that now has officially changed, though, with this announcement from January 8th. The announcement starts out on an optimistic note with this statement by the CEO of Irion. Quote, 80 million people in the United States suffer from hair loss, and there is truly no effective treatment for this condition today. Because of ET-02's unique mechanism of action, we believe that ET-02 has the potential to not only treat, but prevent androgenic alopecia. The results of this clinical trial show we are an important step closer to potentially having a solution for hair loss, unquote. However, the study is clearly just a phase 1 clinical trial, which makes sense since this is the first human data on ET-02. Anyways, this is a small study that included just 24 subjects recruited at about 3 sites in the United States. It was a double-blind placebo-controlled study that looked at 2 different concentrations of ET-02, a 1.25% solution and a 5% solution. The solutions were applied once daily daily, and the study was extremely short duration for a hair loss study, just 4 weeks of treatment with the final evaluation being done a week after the last dose of the drug was given. So the whole study only lasted for 5 weeks. So with such a short study duration, I'm amazed that there were any positive results at all. I mean, most hair loss studies last at least 3 months, and frequently they last 6 months even. This one lasted for only 5 weeks, I should remind you, chooms. Anyways, the first result was that the drug was safe and well tolerated, though with only 24 subjects, it's really impossible to claim that the drug is completely safe. It requires much larger studies to evaluate a drug's safety profile, but at least no safety issues were found in this study. The next result was on the effects of the 2 different concentrations of ET-02 on hair growth. Both the placebo and the 1.25% concentration of ET-02 had only minimal effects on hair growth. However, the 5% concentration did cause a significant increase in hair growth. This 5% concentration caused a 6 times increase in non-vellus hair growth, meaning normal terminal hair growth compared to placebo after just 5 weeks. The report then compared this result to an unrelated separate study of topical minoxidil and found that the results with ET-02 after 5 weeks of treatment were even better than what was seen with minoxidil after 4 months of treatment. Now, they didn't actually compare ET-02 to minoxidil in their study, so this is a little bit of an unfair comparison, but I could see why they want to hype up the results by comparing it to the historical data on topical minoxidil. Anyways, they also found that 5% ET-02 increased the hair width of non-vellus hairs by about 10%. So, next the report brings up the results of some preclinical trials of ET-02. It talks about 2 trials of human scalp tissue grafts, which I assume were grafted onto an animal model, probably mice. In one trial of 60 human scalp tissue grafts from men with androgenic alopecia, ET-02 was, quote, markedly more effective than the control group, unquote. In another study with 103 human scalp tissue grafts, ET-02 was 4 times more effective than topical minoxidil after 4 months of treatment. So, Irion plans to start a phase 2 clinical trial with 150 subjects treated for 6 months to confirm ET-02's safety and efficacy. Next, there are some comments by a Dr. Jerry Shapiro, who is a professor of dermatology at New York University. He says that these results are clear-cut and remarkable. He also notes that achieving this amount of hair growth in just 5 weeks in a clinical trial is unprecedented, which is pretty much my assessment as well. Finally, there are some remarks about the mechanism of ET-02 which are pretty vague. The report claims that ET-02 restores normal function to hair follicle stem cells that have become inactive in age-related hair loss, and that ET-02 corrects this defect. The company believes that ET-02 will be, quote, more effective than existing treatments since it directly addresses what Irion believes is the fundamental cause of androgenic alopecia, which existing treatments do not, unquote. The company also believes ET-02 might rejuvenate melanocyte stem cells in order to prevent the graying of hair. Okay, chums, so while I definitely appreciate the enthusiasm here, there are a lot of fanciful claims being made, so let's come back to reality for a moment. First of all, remember, this is a study of only 24 subjects. There were 2 treatment groups and 1 placebo group, so that's only 8 subjects for each group. That's ridiculously small. The study only lasted for 5 weeks too, so I'm sure that the study was originally designed mostly to look at how well tolerated the 2 concentrations of the drug were, and it's likely that the subjects enrolled were normal volunteers and not people with androgenic alopecia, because that's usually what happens with a phase 1 clinical trial. So I'm sure that even the investigators did not expect to see significant hair growth after only 5 weeks. However, when you're looking at just 8 subjects who received 5% ET-02, there's a very good probability that the result was just by chance alone. That's the problem with a study with such small numbers. I mean, just think about what happens when you flip a coin. Even though the results of a coin flip are 50-50, you wouldn't be that surprised if you flipped a coin 4 times and got heads each time. The point is, the smaller the number of subjects, the greater the chance of seeing a result through chance alone. So these results might show that this really is an amazingly effective treatment, or the results could just be a statistical fluke. We obviously need more data, but I have to say that at least now there is some human data on ET-02, and it could be an effective treatment for androgenic alopecia. Possibly. But I have to say that I strongly disagree that this treatment is somehow treating a fundamental cause of androgenic alopecia that other treatments don't affect. The fundamental cause of androgenic alopecia is DHT and the genetics that cause the environment in the scalp that leads to high levels of DHT that destroy the hair follicles. It is not a good look for Irion to deny this well-established scientific fact. I don't think we really understand how ET-02 affects hair growth by inhibiting PI1, but almost certainly, if it works for androgenic alopecia, it is because it affects a downstream effect of DHT. So certainly, I definitely want to keep my eye on this treatment, chums. It is promising. It may turn out to be effective, but we definitely need some larger studies to prove this. However, given the results of the phase 1 study, I'm definitely a little bit more optimistic than I was when I did my first video on this treatment. So, alright, I just want to go ahead and give my thoughts on that. I will see you hair loss witchers soon. Thank you so much for watching. God bless.